Hello everyone, welcome back to Rolling Solo. My name is Adam Smith, and today I am very excited to be kicking off a series on the channel that I have wanted to do for probably over a year or two, but I really think this is the perfect time to kick this thing off. Now, I put out some recent top X videos, which basically just mean top 15, top 10, top 20, that type of thing. There'll be more to come as we get closer to the end of the year and going into the new year, but this video, I'm going to walk you through the title so you don't get confused, because there could be some confusion here, but this is a brand new segment that's going to happen annually going forward. It's called the Test of Time. It's going to be a look back at solo gaming a decade ago. So technically, if you took a look at the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now, you'd be like, wait, it's 2020. A decade ago would be 2010, and your video in the description and in the title states 2011. Do you know math? Yes, I do, but don't worry, let's ignore it this one time. Give me a pass. I'm just recording this video a couple of weeks in advance. We'll go with that. Going forward, this is going to be a once a year thing, and I will do this at the beginning of each year instead, so to make sure things line up better. Okay, so hopefully that makes more sense for you guys. The purpose of this video is to basically look back at games that came out in that given year. So in 2011, what games came out and what kind of impacts do those games have on me? Also, on top of it, not only just the impacts, but what games that came out that year are still being played, talked about, sought after, traded and bargained for. Maybe they are no longer even printing anymore, like you cannot find them, they're out of print, stuff like that. Like, I just want to talk about those games and kind of what they meant for the hobby, what they meant for me. And then at the end of my big talk, and in this case, this video has 8 of them, I want you guys to let me know your experiences with these games. You don't have to worry about the fact you may not have picked them up in 2011. Maybe you found these games, 4 years down the road, but I imagine some of these games had impacts on where you're currently at now as a solo gamer because these games have been around for so long. So without further ado, I will open up the comments as the video is playing, and certainly let me know your thoughts on each and every one of these, because I think some of the coolest part of this video is going to be the sharing of everyone's thoughts and stories around what each of these games meant to them. And there might be some games in this list you still are just absolutely in love with and will never let go from your collection, right? And there'll be other ones you'll go, well, I played that one, I let it go. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start with the 8th position. In position number 8, we have Dungeons & Dragons: The Legend of Drizzt, the board game. Now, this wasn't the only entry for Dungeons & Dragons in terms of a game that was trying to nail that adventure, exploration, fantasy, fighting, miniatures kind of segment of the hobby. But when it did come out, it had big impacts, and even to this day, people still enjoy playing this, and I can see why. It still has some great mechanics inside of it. Of course, it's aged, and some of the games that have come out after the fact have obviously surpassed it. It's not ranked extremely high, but there's a lot of people that if you talk to them, they still have this game in their collection. I still see this thing popping up on the market to pick up secondhand all the time. People are still, going after it. In this case, taking a look, and of course, we're going to have a lot better data with these games going through them because of the fact they've been around so long. But you can see that people generally enjoyed playing this game in terms of rating it, whether it was the best or recommended way to play. This one also came out in 2011 as well. Yep. And this is another one. So, I mean, you could be in either camp here. You could have said, well, I've played one and not the other, that type of thing. But this game was certainly one that, and both of them were certainly ones that drew a lot of attention to themselves. And I think they actually had an impact on, how dungeon crawlers have evolved to this point. Now, this is really cool. Dawn of the Zeds. Now, this is one that is worth talking about. Now, first off, the original iteration of Dawn of the Zeds came out in 2011. And you can see the publishers listed here at the time, and you can see that it was just a solo playable game. This is one of the games on the list that has evolved so well over time. Now, when it first came out, it was successful in terms of its initial release. People enjoyed it. Of course, this would have been back at a time when solo gaming was not as, widely accepted, let's say, as it is now. But people still enjoyed playing it solo, right? And it still looked pretty decent on the table. This is, of course, when I wouldn't say the market, but the world of the board gaming hobby in general hadn't been completely oversaturated with zombie games at that point. So one that actually came out and had you really strategizing and thinking was a big deal. All right, so this is a really interesting one. It says Euro Family Games there as well. This would be a heavy game, I think, to pull out for the average person anyway. Even though it's not rated heavy for us board gamers, I think the average person at that point in time, this would have been pretty up there. So 2013 came along, and that second edition came out, and I missed this one too. So this one was another one where I kind of said, and maybe for me at the time, it might have been something to do with the artwork or just the look of it. It wasn't really driving me to want to go out and get it. That's obviously a mistake because the game is good. And this second edition, if I take a look at the rating, it went up, and that's where I got in on it, right? So this is 2016, Dawn of the Zeds, and this at this point now the game's over 8.2, and it still is pointing to solo playable as the best way to play it. I definitely firmly agree with that. And the game just looks so much better. And obviously, as time goes on, game and production values go up, so things will look better. But the gameplay got better, and everything about it got better. And I could go on for way too long about how many different, and just in terms of the design of this one, why it's so good. But it's exciting because this is one of the ones on the list that I actually enjoy from the standpoint of seeing. Some of them that you're going to see on the list have been the same since the day they were released in 2011 and haven't changed until now. Whereas this one kind of went through an evolution over the last decade. And it still, in my opinion, probably isn't done. Like they went to Kickstarter with the third edition in 2016, or maybe it was 2015 when it actually was in Kickstarter. But somewhere in that range. And then it delivered, and it obviously went to retail and things like that. And Victory Point Games was the primary publisher at that point in time. And you can see here the other crazy thing too is the weight difference. Like, look at the jump in the weight. So 3.73. What was the second edition? The second edition was rated as 3.15. So you can see it, they literally were progressively upping the weight as they go along with this thing, right? Adding layers to this game. Now, that's obviously worked in their favor. My question would be, is the next iteration, is it going to push it up to 4? I could actually see that happening if they bothered to go to the 4th edition, but maybe at this point they found that perfect sweet spot for gameplay, and it'll just be about production value after that. But long story short, kind of talked about this one quite a bit. I'm pretty sure by even having this on the list, I'm going to have a ton of people that are going to be commenting down below, letting me know, like, I've still got this. I still play this. I love this game. It's not leaving. Other people will say, I've played it. Maybe it was too much. Maybe it was a little overwhelming. Maybe I kind of got lost at the beginning in terms of how to actually play it. There's different people on different ends of the spectrum, but I'd love to hear your experiences about this one. Do you still have it in your collection? Do you still enjoy playing it? Do you pull it off the table or pull it off your shelf to get it to the table quite often? Let me know. Number 6 belongs to Fortune and Glory, the cliffhanger game from 2011. Flying Frog Productions at the helm of this one. If you're familiar with them, they did, they've got quite a few games out there, but one of the ones I really, really love is Shadows of Brimstone. That's one that really hooked me quite badly, and I got very deep into it. I literally have pretty much everything and stuff, and there's more coming in the near future, which I'm terrified of because it just has tons of content. But the thing is, the vast universe of it's insane. But this is one of their earlier games, and from 2011, Fortune and Glory, and this first line right here really sums up the entire game. Feel like Indiana Jones on the hunt for ancient artifacts around the world. So I'll give you an idea of what the game looks like on the table. But that was the driving force behind this, was this open-ended, wacky, not to be taken too seriously, obviously not sticking to reality in terms of what was going on or any type of story event, but it did have that Indiana Jones vibe going to it. But it's adventure, pure adventure. And solo players really did enjoy this. Now, it does say here that the best, was rated as, for the best way to play, it was rated as 3 players. But you'll see here that in terms of the actual solo play, a lot of solo players enjoyed this one and still do. You can still go into the forums here and find people talking about the solo play. There's also files here, like just tons and tons of stuff added into it. Same with Shadows of Brimstone. Individuals have come into the game. It's kind of like a sandbox, and that's the best way to describe Flying Frog Productions games in general. Is they especially this one compared to like Shadows of Brimstone, is it's a sandbox, really. It's just kind of supposed to be this open-ended, massive adventure, and you could play by the book, but you could also fiddle with the rules and turn it into your own kind of adventure, or go off of somebody else's file here on Board Game Geek and go on some crazy adventure. Again, Brimstone's got tons of stuff in there. You can see here a Ninja Dorks. That's amazing. Is that Tristan Hall? Yes, it is. So Tristan Hall's even got his Fang Dangers deck in here, or Dangers deck, I should say. Now, did I ever actually own this one? Never did. I never did. I've never played this one. I missed it completely. Now I know I've had the opportunity to play it. It didn't work out. But for me, like I said, Shadows of Brimstone was the one that stuck for me, or was the first Flying Frog Productions game that stuck for me. But this one came out in 2011, so this had a big impact. So let me know in the comments below. Do you own this one? Do you still enjoy playing it? All those same questions from before. I'd love to hear from you guys. In the 5th position on the list, we have from Fantasy Flight Games, Elder Sign. This is a game that has come to its end. There will not be any more content added to this particular version of Elder Sign, unless of course they decide to come out with a revised version. But this thing saw a whole bunch of expansions. Now it's rated 7 out of 10, which is not like extremely high, but in terms of people that enjoyed rolling dice back in 2011, this was up there in terms of one of the most fun. You can see here, like in terms of the vote count, it was a crazy popular solo game. 86 people said it was best, 102 or 192, sorry, recommended it out of a 315 vote count. That's pretty good. And taking a look again, like Fantasy Flight, even back then in 2011, their table presence, their artwork style, this is very reminiscent of that like Arkham Horror vibe, 2nd edition and 1st edition, like just gritty and nailed that horror feeling. But again, this time around with tons of dice and stuff like this. So there was a whole bunch of expansions that came out for it. But I really think this made a massive impact in the solo gaming community back then. But in terms of people selling on this on the marketplace and in different areas, Facebook groups, whatever, I've definitely seen that. I've seen collections go up and down and be picked up, but it's like as soon as somebody puts one up, they typically are sold almost right away. Because Elder Sign is a great one. You can take a look at the description yourself, just so I don't have to go through this entire thing here. But you can see it was rated the next year as the Golden Geek Best Thematic Board Game nominee, so that's pretty impressive. It's got solo listed right in here because there was a ton of people, like I said, playing this solo. So great game. Brings back a lot of great memories. Now, have I moved past this at this point? Yes. It shows here that it's actually in my collection still. I do a terrible job of keeping that up to date, but I no longer have Elder Sign in my collection anymore. But for what it was back when I was playing it, I enjoyed it quite a bit. So let me know in the comments. Do you still have Elder Sign? Do you own everything for it? Do you love it? Do you hate it? What is it that you think about it now in we're going to pretend we're in 2021. But let me know right now, like, what do you think about the game currently as it stands right now? Is it something that you would actually still pull off the shelf and play, or is it something you'd rather move on to somebody else? All right, we've reached the top half of the list. So in the 4th position, of course, because there's only 8 entries, Gears of War, the board game. This one came out in 2011. You're a cog fighter fighting the Locusts against all odds in a final desperate stand. This was a board game adaptation of the video game, of course, for those of you that play Gears of War, and I did. I played the original, played a whole bunch of them all the way up through, and I haven't played any recently, but I definitely played the first 3, if I remember correctly, and I did enjoy this. And as you can see, it was in my collection at one point, previously owned, so that's actually correct. Every once in a while, those things are right, because my actual updating on BGG is pretty poor. But long story short, this was a surprise hit. Like for solo gamers, this was one that kind of was like, well, the IP is attached. It might be a good game, maybe. But at the end of the day, the miniatures were really nice. The actual gameplay mechanisms inside of it were really well done. The saddest part of this particular entry was the fact of how short of a life it had. Now, I could go into details about that as well, but most people know the story. But it did kind of just shut off. And a lot of people just kind of went, well, that sucks. And it does, because what ended up happening was it obviously went out of print. And then once it went out of print, it became kind of a hot commodity on the solo market, people trying to scrounge this thing up. And of course, some people were price gouging, trying to make sure that like they got, hey, I got something that you're never going to get reprinted again. I managed to actually pay for it at a decent rate, like probably around the rate it was when it actually was in retail at the time. There's an expansion for it, the Mission Pack 1. I thought there was a second mission pack. I could be right. I could be wrong there. Let me know in the comments if that's the case. But I thought there was 2 mission packs. Or maybe the second mission pack was fan-made. That actually might be what I'm remembering. I think that's what it is. Somebody created a cog pack. So I actually, back in the day, I actually got a copy of this Gears of War game and then was able to get the mission pack and able to obviously get that. This is what's all coming back to me now. This custom cog pack collection and things like this. And there's other ones that obviously were made by other people as you go through here. I played through the base for sure and a handful of that custom stuff. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed my time with it. And actually, it's crazy because the game really didn't have tons of longevity in its life. Now it does in terms of its popularity and notoriety, I guess, in the solo gaming community. But like, I'm actually impressed it's held on to its thematic 100 and overall 470, being that it's an out of print game now. Now over time, that's going to continue to slip down and down and down and down because it doesn't have much of a fight left in it, being that you can't get it anywhere brand new. So it's going to be tough. Now it would be amazing if things worked out licensing wise and it was able to be recreated in some way. But that chance is that boat has probably sailed a long time ago. But long story short, this is worth bringing up in 2011, in my opinion, because I think this actually made a major impact in that year and even in following years after it for the solo gaming community in terms of, you could definitely categorize this thing as a dungeon crawler. It's a miniature game. There's dice rolling in it, but you got some hand management going on in there as well. And I really did enjoy my time with it. I thought the game was well designed. Miniatures were really nice. And it was worth the money you actually paid for it. And of course, it was weird because it was a video game that actually was done well. And usually translations from a video game to a board game were kind of hit and miss, or they almost always were hit and miss. And this one was one that definitely hit. Like they did a really good job of nailing the feel of Gears of War inside this box. All right, we're heading to the third position with Friday from 2011. Only Friday can help Robinson Crusoe survive the hazards of this deserted island. This to me was the best at the time small box solo game for that year, hands down. Like nobody would even argue that this was the smallest box package that had the best gameplay inside of it. Literally a deck of cards, couple pieces of cardboard, like. But this thing, and this is a different language, but long story short, this is one that has still stuck around. Now, I don't personally and didn't really stick with me long term, but for people that were just dipping their toes in the solo gaming idea of the hobby, like, hey, could solo gaming actually be a thing? Could it actually be fun? Is there anything really there? This was one that was recommended a lot because it was like, hey, try this, see if you like it solo. It's not a big purchase. It's not going to be like it's not a sprawling footprint on the table. You're not going to be buried in a rule book for 50 years trying to figure it out. Just give us a shot, see what you think. And long story short, overall, this thing pulled a lot of people, I think, into the solo gaming community, whether or not people agree it's actually a good game fundamentally. Now, its rating's only 7.1 at this point in time. So I think as time has gone on, this game's, rating overall and how much people want to play, it's probably gone quite a bit down from where it was. But still, this was a game that, you can't beat quick playtime and things like that. That's always a plus. And there's going to be lots of people, I'm sure, in the comments are going to let me know, like, you're still playing Friday. You still love it. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Still think it's a good game from my experience with it. I just kind of already leapfrogged over it because I found other games that I liked a little bit better. So let me know in the comments. Do you enjoy it? Do you still play it? Is it something that you plan to play into the future? Did you find a game that you think actually does the same type of things but better elsewhere? Is there another game out there that does this better? Or, do you hate this game with a passion and every single time it gets brought up, you wish it would just burn and go away? I don't know. Let me know in the comments because I'd like to know. In the second position, we have The Lord of the Rings, the card game from 2011. This, for me, is where the magic really started as a solo gamer. This game is incredible. There's no other way to put it. Now, granted, as time has gone on, I've leaned more towards Arkham Horror, the LCG, but this game holds a special place in my heart because I will never, ever, ever sell what I have for this game. And that is literally everything. And the crazy thing about this game, for me personally, is it's the one I've still to this date played the most and am the most consumed by in terms of just time that I've actually invested into this game. And also the joy that I got back out of it is like, I haven't found it in any other game to that level yet. And it's when I'm talking about a segment here called The Test of Time. Like when you're talking about The Lord of the Rings as a living card game, came out in 2011 and we're almost in 2021. And like as I said earlier in the video, you guys have to forgive me for the fact I'm doing this a couple weeks early, but almost 10 years, let's say roughly, for Lord of the Rings living card game, and there is still content being pushed out the door for this, and it's not just filler content. This is like content that's still just as enjoyable as the content that came out when it first arrived. That is crazy. And there's not another game out there that I can think of off the top of my head that has the kind of staying power that this game has in the solo gaming community. The funny thing is here, you can see that the actual community rates this as the best with 2 players. I can see why, because there's, in most cases, when you're talking about Lord of the Rings, you're talking about people that have seen the movies. There's a connection to the IP, and typically most people want to be in on it. But this range of 1 to 2, like the best way to play this game is in either case. Like these are, it's a fun. I mean, obviously you'll get a different type of experience if you have 2 players, but the solo community was just all over this game, and I truly believe that when this game landed, there was a fundamental shift in the thought process of solo gaming when this thing landed. I think people bought this game to play 2-player and then started playing the game solo and going, oh my gosh, there's actually something magical about this. And it's like, and maybe it was something to do with the fact that people tied themselves to the IP of Lord of the Rings as just this thing that occurred in their lifetime. Whether they read the book, saw the amazing movies that were created, and then of course you start playing a game that's as wonderfully done in a tabletop form as you could possibly get, and it just matches everything so perfectly. You almost kind of go, could this be real? And it hooked people right in. And I think a lot of people that were playing 2-player continue to play 2-player, but then when that 2-player game was over and the other person was like, I need a break, they ran into the corner, they shut off the lights, they turned on a little lamp, and they played this thing long into the night. And I think this fundamentally changed how solo gaming was viewed, and still is one of those games I look back on and just go, this is nuts. Like you can see down below here, log plays 148. That's nothing. Like I have so many log plays beyond this. I just stopped logging my plays at a certain point because it became tedious to me. But I have an insane amount of time wrapped up in this one. So I do apologize. I talked quite a bit there and didn't really show you many pictures. But this game has been around for a long time. The artwork, even way back in 2011, was phenomenal. And, the different individuals that are a part of the artwork throughout the years, insane. My favorite artist, I probably would butcher the name if I actually tried to pronounce it correctly, is this one right here. And I know it's horribly hard to see that, but I'll try to find. So that was an example of one. And of course, they had a couple different artists, so that was nice. You kind of got variation of different things, but there was a particular artist that continued to pop into these. And as soon as you saw that artist, you knew it was the same one every single time. And the artwork was just vivid and amazing. But all of them are like, that's the thing. Like I look at some of these shots and I'm just like, and I look down at the name and I'm like, there's so many different people involved, but somehow the look of the game in general was so uniform. Like, even though you had all these different artists involved, and you could have your favorites like I did, but it's even the ones that were let's say your least favorite were still incredible. So there is so much to like about this game. There still is. I still, like I say, to this day, collect each and every single thing from it so I can actually play it. And that's the thing. That's the difference with this one, is that to me, it's not about collecting it. It's not about saying, ooh, I'm going to have everything in this game because I remember it from years and years and years ago by playing it a lot. It's because I literally want to play everything in this game. Like, it's that kind of drive. So this is one of 2 games that put the feeling inside of me that I need to start actually creating content. And the reason for that was because I was spending an obscene amount of time playing Lord of the Rings living card game alone. And as time went on, I started realizing I'm playing so many solo games, spending so much time. I really have a passion for this beyond the average person. Like, I really need to actually try to extend this kind of love for the hobby, or love even just for the single game, and reach beyond it and try to see if I can show other people how much fun this really is. And I don't think I was alone in that feeling for this particular game. I think this general feeling was felt by, as you can see in here, tons of people, and it's nonstop. So if you are a brand new solo gamer and you want a game, this is it. The only downside to this at this point that I would say to you is it's going to be very difficult to find all the packs that you want. So if you get hooked on this thing, the danger is you are going to be paying out your ears to try to get everything. So my recommendation on that front would be maybe try to look at Fantasy Flight's LCGs. Their newer options like Marvel, the LCG or Marvel Champions, sorry, their LCG, or get the Arkham Horror LCG because you'll probably have better luck collecting everything, and catching up essentially. The Lord of the Rings at this point just has an amazing amount of content. It's just mind blowing how much stuff there is, but it's also extremely difficult to find stuff. So, long story short, this thing sits like super high in the customized list. It's actually surprising. It's only 120 on the overall. I don't agree even in the slightest on this rating. This rating is absolute crap. This game is like guaranteed 9 and higher. There is no reason whatsoever that this game should be 7.6. And the only reason I think it might be is because the core experience had kind of an easy scenario, a medium scenario, and a hard scenario. And a lot of people hit that hard scenario and they were like, this is impossible. This isn't fun. I don't enjoy it. But I think what they missed was that this was the first LCG that came out. They didn't understand what a cycle was going to be. They didn't understand it would be an expansion box with a bunch of packs that go with it together to complete an experience. And then, of course, once you got that first cycle, you open up all your deck building options, and that original scenario that was a pain to get through in this base game becomes a little bit easier. And so that, granted, it's all based to your own skill level of deck building to actually overcome it, which was part of the magic of the game, was trying to create a deck to beat this scenario. But long story short, I could literally go on about this game until I'm blue in the face. But this thing, 10 years from now, let's say, I still think this thing is going to be talked about. It may not be printing anything new, but this game is not going anywhere unless there's a new edition of it coming down the pipes from Fantasy Flight. It's so good. And last but certainly not least, we have Mage Knight, the board game from 2011. I mean, this is a game that this is the beginning of it all for me. This is where I realized I was absolutely a fan of solo gaming. And so what ended up happening was, without going into my whole backstory, basically I purchased Mage Knight just on the recommendation of course, you could see, I mean, back then, maybe it wasn't as crazy high rated as it is now, but it was still way up there. I looked up, solo games on Board Game Geek and which ones were rated the highest because, again, I knew nothing. And then sure enough, Mage Knight was up there. And I said, this looks really cool. Like, I mean, how could you not look at all these cards and this map of this area you can explore and all these different things? And there's castles and you're fighting dragons. And I was just like, this is going to be like the coolest experience ever. Now, granted, the thing that's impressive with this game is the fact it's not tied to anything that's like a big IP. And stuff like that. Now, the other crazy thing is the weight of this thing is ridiculous. But for me, for some strange reason, I think maybe I came into Board Game Geek and I was blind to what this meant. For me, I probably didn't see this. This probably wasn't there when Board Game Geek was around when I first bought it. And I probably thought that, oh, this is probably like the weight of something like the weight of the box. Probably the weight of the box. Like I had no idea what the heck I was doing. I found this site for the first time and I was like, Mage Knight, let's just go find it and buy it. So I buy it, I bring it home. I open up the rule books and I have no prior knowledge as to what a rule book should be like for any board game whatsoever. So I just go into this blind. I open the rule book. I'm like, oh my gosh, this rule book's big, but I'm reading it and I'm just consuming it, enjoying it. I'm not comparing it to anything because there literally isn't anything in my mind to compare it against. I haven't played any other solo games before. And then as I went through it, I just after a couple games, I was like, the system, the literal game mechanics and the system behind the AI was so well done that it actually caused me to start doing some. I started doing writing. I started writing for a site that I don't even remember the name of now. That actually is bringing me back so far. But there was somebody who asked me. They said like, "Oh, you're into solo gaming and you like to write about the solo AI and how what it does and how it works." And I created like this whole page right up on a website about Mage Knight and how great the AI is and everything. And I think that that person saying, "Hey, come on my site and write a little bit about solo gaming. You can cover that side of things like the solo stuff," kind of made me realize like I'm hooked on this stuff. Like I'm really into it, and I really want to share more about what I know, even though at that point I knew very little. I want to share more about my passion for this. And so what was happening at the time was I was playing Mage Knight the board game, and then at the exact same time I picked up Lord of the Rings, probably about a month after. And because that was easy for me, because I went and looked up, well, what's the next best game out there for solo play, for solo play, and Lord of the Rings popped up. And I'm like, oh, I love Lord of the Rings. This is going to be great. And I bought it. And of course, I even talked to my uncle Rodney from Watch It Played, and I was like, I'm going to buy this thing. Like, I think Lord of the Rings would be fantastic. And he told me, he's like, it's an amazing game. You'll love it. And that's all it took. I bought the base game and I was hooked. And the two of these games in tandem sucked me in so badly that like I said, I didn't log many of my plays on this one. But like I said, I was really bad at doing that. The only reason I was logging plays in Lord of the Rings Living Card Game was because in every single log back then, I would log my actual deck. I would literally put the log in and then state what deck I used, including all the cards. I was crazy about it. Like, that's the kind of insanity. Whereas Mage Knight, I didn't really see any need to log plays. I did a few times here, but at the end of the day, it was just like, I'm just going to pick the play, Conquest or whatever it is, and just go do it. So I did Solo Conquest or something like that. But this is an amazing game. The thing is, though, is that this one and Lord of the Rings, for me, are obviously the two on the list that had the biggest impact for me. There's a couple on the list that I would still play if I got my hands on them again, or if I saw them again. But these are the ones that really has stood the test of time. And then, of course, if you actually take a look at so it's kind of a funny story. I bought the base game for Mage Knight. I bought the Shades, Krang. I think when I bought Krang, there was some kind of weird color issue or token sizing issue at that time, way back. And then, of course, right after I got all that resolved, they're like, oh, the Ultimate Edition is coming out a few years later. And I'm like, okay, well, I put through all that pain of getting all of my Mage Knight boxes to actually be the same. That was one pain with the game, is it was really well made or really well designed, but the production quality, QA kind of quality side of things was pretty like there was some serious issues on that front. And that's kind of what I'm alluding to, like different color shading on the backs of cards and tokens that they weren't even the same cut sizes. Like it was a mess. But then the Ultimate Edition came out. That's what I picked up, and I'm perfectly happy with it. I have no issues with the Ultimate Edition at all, and its rating is extremely high. It'll never eclipse the original game, though, because so many people are tied to this version of it. But it's so good. It's so good. 2011 was a good year. And the crazy thing is, when I look back at the year in general, I'm like, when you think about it, there wasn't like a ton of great games. But the games that actually did come out when we're talking solo, the 2 or 3 or 4 at the top were pretty impactful games. But again, there wasn't a ton back then, because solo gaming the doors hadn't really opened up to solo gaming as an option back then, which makes to me no sense, because people sat around in the dark basements and played their video games and thought that was perfectly normal. But 10 years ago, the idea of sitting down and playing a board game by yourself was very like, you're really going to do that? Like, you're going to set it up and then you're going to play it, and then you're going to like run the AI and then you're going to play it. You're going to have fun. That concept was foreign to everybody. But I think as time's gone on, games like this from 2011, I really think 2011 was a pivot year, one that wasn't even well known at the time that it was a year that was big. But only years later did everyone realize how amazing Mage Knight is for the solo community, as well as Lord of the Rings, the card game, as the years went on, and then kind of look back and went, wow, that year was big. Like, it had some huge impact. It had ripple effects. If I hadn't have found Mage Knight and I hadn't have found Lord of the Rings, they didn't exist, and I went to the next game on the list, it would have been like Gears of War. Maybe I would have played Gears of War or whatever else was on my list, and it would have been like, yeah, this is fun, I enjoy it, but it didn't hook me. There was something about Lord of the Rings Living Card Game that hooked me, and it did not let me go. And that's why my passion built and built and built and built, and then I just started going after everything else. Plus Mage Knight on the side. It's a devastating combination to have a game like Lord of the Rings Living Card Game that's pumping out content in these packs, and then to have Mage Knight that's so well designed for solo play. It was like the best 1-2 punch that any person could ever receive, to go from not enjoying solo gaming or knowing nothing about it to instantly becoming a massive fan of it. And I think, like I said multiple times in this video, 2011 was a huge, huge pivot year for solo gaming in general, even if people didn't realize it during the year. So, long story short, that is the look back. Now, I do apologize because sometimes when I go on these little, talks and thoughts and stuff like this, I don't do a good job of showing you guys pictures of stuff. But with this one, the difference is that a lot of people have seen this game before on the table and stuff like this, and these things have been around for quite a while. Just be aware of the fact that if you're not into the heavier side of games, like if you look at your collection on Board Game Geek and you don't typically up in this weight scale, just be ready for quite a learning curve at the beginning. But I'm telling you right now, if you get over that hump, it's worth everything. So that's it. That's pretty much all I've got to say for this list. Again, this wasn't like and I put these in order from 8th all the way up to 1st. They probably could have switched places. I could have probably put Lord of the Rings on the very top and Mage Knight at the bottom. But I kind of wanted to do it in terms of their impactfulness, and because Mage Knight was the first one that I bought, it had to be number 1. But if I had to choose out of Mage Knight and Lord of the Rings, which one I think hooked me into the solo gaming world and didn't let me go, it's Lord of the Rings: The Living Card Game. That's the one that instilled the passion that has not gone away yet. So that's all I got to say. Thank you guys so much. Let me know your stories, thoughts, comments down below. I'm sure there's a ton of you guys that as a result of 2011, the ripple effects maybe affected you in some way across some of these games, or maybe ones I didn't even mention. Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories too. I think it'd be fun to kind of bounce thoughts off each other about what we enjoyed back then. And expect to see a video like this next year. However, next year it will be at the very beginning of 2022 that it reaches back a decade to 2012. And it'll be a perfect 10-year difference. Whereas this year, we're off by a year, but I'm sure you guys forgive me. Thank you guys so much for watching. And as always, keep on rolling solo.